introduces it for me. And actually, if you'll keep yourself unmuted, because I know the next item on the agenda is the minutes, so we can do that as well. Thank you. Ashfield?
Present.
Bernardston?
Joel Cole, Planning Board.
You?
Dan Brown.
Buckland?
Heather Butler, present.
Charlemont?
Marguerite Willis and Sarah Reynolds.
Coleraine?
Kevin Fox here.
Conway?
Erica Goldman representing Conway.
Deerfield?
Shepard McDaniel, representing Deerfield.
Irving?
William Benberry, Irving.
Gill?
Charles Garfield, representing Gill.
Greenfield? Holly? Heath?
Brian DeVries Heath.
Vacancy in Leverett. Leiden? Monroe? Montague?
Steve Ellis, present.
New Salem?
Wayne Hashi for the Salem.
Northfield?
Jacques, present.
Orange?
Dane Pierce, present.
Rowe? Shelburne? Shutesbury?
Rita Farrell, representing Shutesbury.
Sunderland?
Present.
Warwick? Wendell? Whately?
Lynn Sibley, representing Whately.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome.
Yes, welcome. Thank you. The first order would be to adopt the minutes of January 27th, 2022. You. Second?
Second, New Salem.
Thank you. Thank you.
And here we go again.
And here we go again.
Maybe the last time for the night. Okay, Ashfield,
Aye.
Bernardston,
Abstain, was not there.
okay, Buckland,
Aye.
Charlemont,
Abstain.
Coleraine,
Yes.
Conway,
Aye.
Deerfield,
Yes.
Irving,
Aye.
Hill,
Aye.
Greenfield's not here, Holly's not here, Heath,
Aye.
no Leverett, no Leiden, no Monroe, Montague,
Ellis, aye.
New Salem,
Aye.
Northfield,
Aye.
Orange,
Aye.
no Rowe, no Shelburne, Shutesbury,
Abstain.
Sunderland,
Aye.
no Warwick, no Wendell, and Whately.
Yes.
Okay, that passes with a simple majority.
Thank you so much. We've got a great meeting tonight. I first just curious if anybody is new to the meetings, haven't been here before. If not, welcome to everybody. Just happy to be back at a council meeting. I'm gonna be a little brief today because we have a really important presentation for the COVID-19 after action review and findings. So I'll just a short council update. I just want to talk a little bit about the Western Mass Selectmens and Planning Agencies Conference that we had a couple weekends back in East Hampton. I thought it was an amazing time. It was really great to see everybody come together again. You could tell people were really excited to see each other and be at a function together in person. It was well attended. I'm not sure the number, but there was I think maybe close to 100 people there. It was really great. We talked, we had opening remarks. We had legislative panel with Natalie Blais and Daniel Carey, and Senator Joe Comerford was there. And so they gave some updates on things that are going on. We had a police reform and its impact on small town. We had like 4 different workshops. 2 were kind of going simultaneously. So I didn't get to see all of them, but I did moderate the police reform one, and then there was the ARPA funding and economic recovery from COVID-19 workshop. And there was another workshop after the break, which was the impact of post-COVID population shifts on housing affordability. And then also a workshop on public infrastructure in Western Mass, and a presentation by Auditor Suzanne Bump's office. She couldn't be there for that meeting, but Ben was there, and he was great, and talked a lot about the needs of Western Mass when we are really in tough shape out here as far as the eastern half of the state. Just nothing new, but really brings it to home how much we need infrastructure spending in Western Mass. So Ben did a great job and was there as well. And
It was a great meeting.
it was a great meeting. I'm looking forward to it. I think the one thing that we found from that is that we want to have more time for questions, because, you know, we hadn't been together long, and so we would want to present, and then we ran out of a bunch of time for questions. And I think if we did it again, we would add a couple more hours just to leave a lot of time for networking and talking and all. But the food was great from Tandem Bagels, was awesome. So it was a good time, and MMA did a great job supporting us and doing that. And I want to thank MMA and all the staff there, Isabel and everybody worked really hard for it. So that's what I have for a council update. There is executive committee update. Bill Pearlman, do you have a moment?
Yes, I am both here and the roll call, and I vote yes on the minutes. The executive committee update is brief. As we do every month, we had an update on the radio system, transferring over to the 800 system, which is going well. Currently, we're also talking about administrative control of it, and the council will be the intermediary between the users and the state, and we're working out the details of that. We talked about the FERC relicensing of Northfield, and we're pushing to make sure that they maintain the level of recreational facilities and maintain them and keep them up to date. First Light seems to want to discontinue some of them, but we're arguing against that. We approved the appointment of Andrew Bresciano of Greenfield Savings Bank to the committee, the Franklin Regional Housing Redevelopment Board. The council gets to appoint members of that board. Lastly, we had received copies of the after action report and discussed it briefly and how it would be presented, and that is the prime subject of much of the rest of this meeting, so I won't say any more about that. But thank you.
Sorry about that, Bill. I'm sorry too. Also, Jay, I missed our regionally elected people. Jay, you're here. Do you vote yes for the minutes?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Julia is not here. Our planning board member is not here tonight.
All right, thank you. Executive director update, Linda.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to be quick because hoping to get to our group as quickly as possible. So I'm going to limit my updates to about 6 updates. If you've read the council updates and have questions about anything else, please let me know. Let me start by saying, hot off the press is our annual report for the Franklin Regional Council of Governments. This is a new format. Instead of trying to do an exhaustive look at every project and issue we are working on, we've picked 1 to 3 projects to really emulate the scope of what we do. And we hope that this new format is interesting and different and informative. Please provide feedback to both Mark Maloney and I. Mark, wave at Mark. There's Mark, our new communications manager. Bill mentioned the migration to Comiers. It is going swimmingly well. So amazing, really, that we've hired an engineering firm to look at decommissioning, to help us figure out how to decommission FCCS when we are ready to do that. That will include sequencing the decommissioning of our emergency communication system. Nothing will happen until the paging solution is resolved. But sequencing it, figuring out how much of our equipment and how many of our tower sites will be of use to EOTS and the COMIR system, and then how we dispose of the rest. The next internal task for the COG is to look at our surplus disposal policy and bring it to the executive committee so that we are ready for decommissioning. I hope that all of you have registered and have been attending, and if you haven't, you still have time to register and attend information sessions on state and federal grants. This is a joint effort of the COG, Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, Berkshire Regional Planning Commission, Senator Comerford's office, Representative Blaze' office, and a bunch of other legislative offices. We have a 5-part series. 2 have occurred. We had a long presentation from Executive Office of Housing, Economic Development, the Department of Housing and Community Development, and Mass Development about Community One Stop for Growth funding programs. On just this last Tuesday, Federal Highway and Massachusetts Department of Transportation joined us for a discussion about the literally billions of dollars of transportation funds that are available to municipalities. All of those sessions and materials and the recording for those sessions are on our website. Coming up next on Tuesday, May 10th, is an extravaganza of the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, where we'll be talking about the Municipal Vulnerability Program, the Department of Ecological Restoration. We'll talk about their grant sources. The Department of Energy Resources will be there, and the Department of Environmental Protection will be there. Tuesday, May 24th, Mass Historic, Division of Local Services, Mass Cultural Council, and then finally, June 7th will be broadband and cybersecurity. Massachusetts Broadband Institute will be managing $55 million of digital equity funds that will be given out to municipalities. And either Mass Broadband Institute or the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development will be managing another $100 million of broadband capital funds. And there is also a significant amount of cybersecurity funds, 80% of which must go to municipalities. It's unclear right now what state agency will be managing that, which is why we put that at the last session in hopes that we have that information. Attend those. They're very good. Long, but good. COVID activity, there's a number of vaccine clinics scheduled throughout Franklin County in May. Please go to our website to find out where those are. It's spring, so it's traffic counting season. If you are looking into any economic development or transportation or culvert projects and you need traffic counts, please contact Lori Scarborough at the COG. We can do volume counts, speed counts, dirt roads, gravel roads, bike counts, pedestrian counts, turning moving counts. Anything that you need, we will try to accomplish sometime between the spring and the fall. And then finally, Bill mentioned this a little bit. After many, many, many years, we are expecting the FERC relicensing agreement to come out for the hydroelectric facilities along the Connecticut River. We've been contacted by Montague and Irving asking whether the COG will provide legal counsel to review that settlement agreement. We will be talking about that and figuring out what the cost for that is. This is a 50-year license agreement that will impact the communities along the Connecticut River and the entire region. So it's likely a good use of funds. We'll come back in July if we decide that is something that we need to ask you for COG money to spend on that effort. And that's all I have, unless there are questions.
Thank you. Next up, we have Finance Committee update. Michelle?
Is Michelle here?
Is
She's
she?
not here.
Oh, she's not here.
No.
We-
Claire, you want to talk about the audit at all? Surprise! Want to talk about the audit at all?
Yes, sure. Claire McGinnis, Finance Director. We have passed another audit, which is always a milestone and an important hurdle. Although we should never be surprised that we follow good procedures and we pass audit every year. Let me see what else is here. FY22 is on track. This year's budget to date looks good. It doesn't look like we'll need any budget amendments for the council in July, or the Finance Committee in July. And with our audit results, we also apply for our indirect rate, which is another annual process that allows us to set up FY23, our grant program for FY23 that's coming in July.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Planning board update. Is Julia here?
She's not here.
She's not here either. So we are moving on to our presentation, just like that. Do you want to?
Yeah, let me do a quick
Yes,
intro.
please. Thank you.
So I think all of you know that the COG was very involved in COVID response from the earliest days of COVID, when there was a question of who's on first, what is the region going to do. We started in week 1 by providing staff support to Greenfield's Emergency Operations Center. We opened up the multi-agency coordinating committee and provided regular updates on what was happening in the region, how we could work together, etc. From there, we moved to managing hospital beds and morgue space in Western Mass hospitals. We secured and distributed PPE first for our hospitals and our healthcare providers, and then for our municipalities, businesses, and farms. From day 1 through today, we have been doing contact tracing for our CPHS district towns. We provided business assistance, both helping our businesses with understanding the rules and regulations about closing and opening, but also economic resilience and recovery assistance. We convene groups of stakeholders, sometimes on a daily basis, more often on a weekly or monthly basis, to review and coordinate protocols and needs and messaging. We worked at the state level to protect the interests of Franklin County. And then we began giving vaccinations by advocating for regional collaboration, providing incident command and logistical support, and being part of the effort to distribute 30,000 vaccines in Franklin County. And we continue to provide vaccine options throughout May. So throughout all of that, we would at times pause and say, do we have responsibility for this? And sometimes that question was, do we have contractual responsibility? Sometimes it was, do we have the moral responsibility? And sometimes we asked, do we have the authority to do this? And that's what we really wanted to look at with the help of an outside consultant. And there are many definitions for an after-action review. And the one I really liked that I Googled is that an after-action review is a method for extracting lessons from one action, event, or project and applying the lessons learned to others. It enables a team to analyze for themselves what happened, why it happened, and how to use learnings to sustain strengths and improve weaknesses. And that's really what we wanted to do. We did not ask Ardent to examine what we did and how we did. We didn't ask them for an assessment of our activities. We asked Ardent to look back at what we did with the help of our stakeholders so that we could look forward and really understand what role we should play in future large-scale or regional emergencies. We wanted to understand whether our active response role was a fluke or it's something that we should assume, expect, and prepare for in a more formal and defined way, so that as an organization and as a region, we are better prepared for future events. So that is what we ask Ardent to do. Ardent has been great to work with, and let me introduce Bill Etter to tell you more about what he learned.
Okay, thank you. And Mark, can you bring up the slides? I'm doing this remotely from his office.
Little technical difficulties earlier this afternoon, so Mark is not present in the room,
And Bill,
but
would you
look
like-
at that.
Would you like Scott and Brian to also be unmuted? Will they be
Yes,
contributing?
this is going to be interactive.
Okay.
3 ways.
So if the two of you could please unmute, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
I'm unmuted. I'm good.
All right, so I am Bill Etter. Thank you for having me here this evening. And from the Ardent Decisions Group, myself and our two teammates, Scott Rice and Brian Neal, will be here to outbrief you on what we found for the after action review and improvement plan, just as the executive director talked about. That's how we looked at it. A quick introduction about ourselves. The Ardent Decision Group is a consulting group, and I know some people think consulting is a bad word, but we're good people in our past life, and we're trying to continue that on to the consulting life. So we truly are here to help. We're not here to criticize, and you'll see as we go through this presentation, we will not see that slant. Anyway, so we are a consulting group that focuses on our vast military experience, and we're talking 300 years. You'll hear in a second.
You look great.
Collectively,
Oh.
collectively 300 years. I'm only 100, but we have done more than our share of after action reports, extensive all hazard planning, and we also are set up to do crisis leadership training. We've all been in those situations. So I'll start with myself, and then we'll do the introduction of the other two gentlemen. I was born and raised in Connecticut, though I spent a lot of time in Massachusetts with my grandparents in Long Meadow. Attended UConn on a scholarship for ROTC, and I flew F-16s in the Air Force for 8 years on active duty. Then I went up to the Vermont Air Guard for 20 years and flew F-16s up there. I've been in the air over Iraq with an F-16. I've been on the ground in Iraq, and I've been on the ground in Afghanistan. After that, I went back on active duty, went down to DC, and my first position was Director of Domestic Operations for the National Guard Bureau. That's a 465,000 person organization, and I can guarantee you every flood, fire, and hurricane was on my plate. So we got my hands dirty in what we call DISCA, Event Support to Civilian Authorities, did that a lot. While in DC, I did a lot of other things. I had testified to Congress. I've briefed multiple members of Congress, probably 100 times. I've been in the White House Situation Room. I ran a $10 billion budget and was also responsible for strategic planning. So I think we've had some experience that we can come in here and share and help. And you'll hear the other gentlemen have equally extensive experience in the Washington, D.C. area. After that 6 years, they thought I was doing okay. So they promoted me, sent me down to Florida, and I was responsible for the air defense of the United States for the last 3 years. So in May of 2016, I retired as a 3-star general. So we have another 3-star general, Scott Rice.
Hi, everyone. I'm down at DC right now doing some engagements down here. Just flew down from Massachusetts in the cold weather up there, and now I'm down here in the nice warm DC area. And one thing I wanted to add to Bill's comments is don't let them fool you. The Guard was established in 1636, almost 400 years ago, and I think Bill was there. I think he was part of it. He is great he doesn't look a day over 400 to me. So that's good. As Bill said, I'm also a retired 3-star general, and I served for 40 years and just retired a little more than a year and a half ago. And I was born and raised in New Hampshire, a graduate from RPI or Rensselaer in New York. I flew F-111s for almost 10 years on the active duty in the Air Force, and then went to A-10s out in Western Mass, out in Westfield. And I've accumulated, 4,500 hours of flying time. I've had more than 100 flights into combat zones in the Middle East, over 8 different deployments to hostile locations. But one thing I'm very proud of is I also served as the Adjutant General in Massachusetts for both Governors Deval Patrick and Charlie Baker. And I commanded the National Guard in the Commonwealth for more than a dozen security and emergency disaster events, like the Boston Marathon bombing, Hurricane Irene. I was in command then. After being an adjutant general, I went back to active duty for 4 years in the Pentagon, and that was my last assignment to run and manage the Air National Guard as the director. From the Pentagon, I trained, organized, and equipped. That was my job of almost 108,000 Air Guardsmen with a $12 billion budget, and that covers all 50 states, 3 territories, and the District of Columbia. As we call it in our group, we call it the 54, which is the 50 plus those 3 territories in the district. My experience includes numerous engagements across the Commonwealth with the governor, the cabinet, the governor's staff, the Commonwealth legislative body, and then similar engagements when I went down to DC with the federal government on both the executive and the legislative branch on briefings, testimony, presenting bills, programs, law changes, all that type of thing. So now I'll hand it over to Brian, who is also on the call and on our team. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Scott. Good evening, everybody. Hope you can hear me okay. So I'm a retired 2-star. So in this group of 3, I'm kind of an underachiever, so I won't go into my stuff too much, compared to them. The word loser comes up when I'm with the 3 of them. I've worked for and with both of those guys over about the last decade and a half, and we're still talking, so that should tell you something. So in the Guard in general, you heard both those guys talk. We do a lot of crisis response. That's what we do. So Bill and I, we worked together when he said he was the operational guy at the Guard Bureau. We did H1N1, we did oil spill. And we do stuff like that all the time, earthquakes, hurricanes, and flooding around the country. And so we're pretty good at the response and the planning and all that. So that's kind of our credibility. I won't go into my whole resume, except I'll just tell you about one job I had, which might interest you. For a short period of time, there's only about 3 or 4 of us. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he's our #1 military officer. He decided to put together nuclear, current operations, homeland defense, that's defending the homeland, and current domestic ops, so flooding, whatever goes on, assisting the FBI, et cetera. He put those together with, like I say, nuclear, ISR. He put it with space. He did all that stuff, and I was the first guy to run that for him. So when Sandy hit, they brought me into the room with the SecDef, Secretary of Defense, every day for some kind of briefing, because that's what we ran it. We ran the response for the military. We kind of centrally, I shouldn't say we ran it. We were the kind of central point for it. So Boston bombing, when that happened, it turned out the military outside of the Massachusetts Guard, because they did a great job, but mostly it was an FBI, Massachusetts Guard, in-state police kind of thing. But we got called for meeting with all the deputy directors of every agency, NSA, FBI, et cetera. And I was the guy in uniform to represent the military function. So I just want you to know we have a lot of experience there. So I'll go back to what Bill said. Look, we're very excited to be working with you guys, and we're very impressed, and that'll come out in our discussion. And we're just here to help at all times. That's our only purpose here. So thanks for inviting all of us today. And that's all I got. And I grew up in Georgia, and I know I talk fast. So wherever you're from, you can pretend I'm from your place.
All right, thanks, Frank. We also have another retired 2-star who actually has a different board meeting. I couldn't be here, but he was also an overachiever, went out and got a PhD, and he was the vice president for global resiliency for New York University, the largest private college in the world. And then our rest of our team is 2 retired colonels and 2 retired lieutenant colonels, one who was a town manager, and the other lieutenant colonel, his last job with the Air Force was working in FEMA headquarters. So we think we have some experience in this domestic ops world. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to cover why we're here, how we got here, what we did with this project, what we found, some suggestions, and what the possible way forward. I've been to more than my share of briefings. I can assure you, this is not going to be death by PowerPoint. It's going to be less than 30 minutes. There's only 12 slides, and we're 2 into them, so we're going to keep it moving. Next, please. Okay, so that RFP is how we got here. The FRCOG had put it out. We looked at it. We decided that not only could we do it, we think we could do exceptionally well at it. So we put a bid in it. We got selected. So we're happy to be here. So thank you. We met with the executive director and her team, and we laid out, well, what do you really want us to do? And that's where it became obvious that an after-action report had already been done about PPE and how hard it was to get, and you have to use 2 systems to order bleach versus face mask, and people did that, and they did well on that after-action report, and they had asked it to kind of take it up a level, make it strategic, not tactical. So that's what you'll see here is the not every last little response. What they actually did, was it authorized, was it funded, and should they do it again? And that's what you'll hear this evening. So we are the outside look. I've read your charter. It's very well written. Matter of fact, I called you up and I said, where did you copy it from? And you didn't copy it from anybody.
Jay,
that guy.
Close. Congratulations. I really was like, wow, in 1997, did Massachusetts give you this and you just signed your name to it?
We wrestled it from.
It's really good. It's really good. But one part that is in there in Article 2, 2.2.2, I think, Jay, you probably have that memorized, but I'm going to read it exactly. It encourages a continued review of the functions performed by the FRCOG. So I think, this is kind of like whoever wrote our Constitution was brilliant. That was a brilliant statement to put in there. This is encouraged doing exactly what we're doing, okay? This is not 1997 anymore. In fact, you could argue we barely had an internet. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have threats, and people didn't move around as much. So as communicable diseases scatter around the globe in days, not years. So anyway, I'm going to encourage this review by the time we're over there. Next slide, please. Okay, I do not believe in putting a picture in every slide just to have a picture like you'll see sometimes, but I think a couple pictures right here, we need to get reminded for a second. So the center picture right now is just a grim reminder of 1 million people. Just about 1 million people have died of COVID. This is serious stuff. No one expected to go this long, or at least I didn't expect it to go this long. January 20th, 2020 was the first confirmed case in the United States. See that there underneath the bus? Today is day 830, and we still have COVID here. Now, I would submit that we are learning to live with COVID and around COVID, but the fact is it's not gone away. It was never a 2-week thing, and it certainly isn't now. If you look at the bottom left, the unemployment rate hit 14.7%. That's the Great Depression. That's where we're at. My family has a business that's been around for 3 generations, and it came about 3 days from going out of business. This was really bad. The Wall Street Journal said 200,000 extra businesses went out due to COVID. And I'll bet every single person, either in person here or on the camera, knows somebody that business failed. It's tragic. In the upper right there with the school bus, this is also tragic. We kept their kids out of school. But I'm not saying that was right or wrong, but I do know that the loss of education, the loss of socialization, the loss of just growing up is just heartbreaking, and those kids can never get that back. So it is definitely worth studying. And then the last thing is the vaccine. When the vaccine came out, was that going to save us? And it turned out you actually have to get vaccines to people. You got to keep them cold, and then they don't work forever, which we didn't know. So it's more of a shot than a vaccine, and it works different in every single person. And then lastly, viruses can mutate, and who knew? But now we know, and it mutated many times. So the 2 words that have changed our lives forever is social distancing and due to COVID. And that did not help us for the better. So we consider this the most serious business here, and we took a very hard look at it that way. Next slide, please. Okay, I want to slow down on this slide because this is something, go ahead, that's the first one. You only get one, just one more. Okay, so this was really different, and I struggled, and we struggled, Scott and Brian and I, and what we pretend you're looking at a top-down view. We want to show the difference of what the FRCOG did here, and so this is not representing of a level of effort, it's an area of effort. So you're looking down on the hockey rink here, okay? So we start out with normal operations, which is planning and day-to-day ops is the FRCOG charter business, and I believe that they do very well at that, but it's pretty much spelled out and defined. Next slide, please. Well, on the bottom here, you can see that COVID went up and went down, went up and went down. We all know that story between the last 830 days. Next slide, please. So as soon as COVID hit, it didn't take long to start to leave the planning and the day-to-day section. Next slide, please. And they entered what I'll call the response area. Next slide, please. So response is not covered by the charter right now. And we'll look at different ways that maybe it should or shouldn't. But now go ahead and build this out the rest of the way. So as COVID went up and down, as vaccines came in and out, as Omicron and Delta and everything, the FRCOG went up and down into areas a response that it's not normal for them to do that. There was a void, they filled it, they should have. I think it was the right thing to do, but that doesn't mean it was a comfortable place for them to operate. And when you have people operating in a space that's not defined, then that also causes friction. So I would surmise to you that it's either define what you want them to do in that area of response, or tell them not to do that, but to not tell somebody and expect them to go places that's kind of hanging off the limb of the tree is just not a very good idea. So this was, I believe, like I said, the correct thing to do. A lot of people did a lot of great stuff on their own initiative, and it should not go unnoticed. But it was not written down anywhere where they could do that or they should do that. So the areas, the executive director already gave you the whole list of areas where they went, and I think that we have all of them except I'll add the technical assistance to the schools, because it was a concern that adjoining school districts could not have conflicting policy because, hey, how come over there and there? So there was a lot of stuff that happened that doesn't come anywhere close to day-to-day or planning operations. So good on you for that. Okay, how do we do this? Next slide, please. The other partner that couldn't be here with the PhD, he's a really smart guy, and he knows all about research. And he said, we're going to do this very methodically. Here's how we're going to do it. I believe it worked real well. But when it's data-driven and you do different avenues of approach, that way you really don't miss anything, or you're less likely to miss things. So we started off, we did a survey, and hopefully some of you here took the survey. We did interviews. I know some of you here were interviewed. And then we did a focus group. And from that, then we developed a plan to how to improve and learn upon these lessons learned. And as you talked about lessons learned, you really want to have lessons applied. Lessons learned, that Washington, D.C. has shelves, actually they have buildings full of lessons learned, and every hurricane, I can guarantee you, they turn around and learn the same thing. Wow, we're gonna have to pay for that. What should we do? And I could go on and on and on and write the response, because they just don't seem to change, adapt, and improve, and I hope that you will, and I think that you will. We used 3 buckets to figure out what was happening and how people thought of that. Because remember, perception is reality if that's your perception. So starting with the value, this area was important, because if the FRCOG is perceived to have value, then people will enable them to continue to do good things. And if they don't, they'll shut them out. And one of the things we had in the survey was a place to please write in anything else you can think of. And I guarantee you, we had both sides of the spectrums. Greatest response ever, what were they doing? So the good news is the overall perception is there's value to having the FRCOG, there's value for the FRCOG's response. So we do believe there'll be support to do some small changes to enable a more structured response next time there's a dire emergency. And I don't know when that's going to be, and I don't know what that's going to be. And quite frankly, you'd be fooling yourself to say, I know what it is, because I mean, a lot of people never knew where Afghanistan was, and a lot of people thought towers in New York stayed forever, and a lot of people did not think we'd have a worldwide pandemic that went from 0 to 1 million miles an hour in less than 4 weeks. So a lot of people have been surprised. Next bucket we had was obligations and responsibilities. Massachusetts is one of the 10 home rule states, which means, you keep the power unless we have to give it to you. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's like, good old Yankee stuff. That's great. But at some point in time, we've got to figure out the balance of some centralization enables better responses. So we do believe there's a point where some authority has to be given to the FRCOG so that they can do a little bit more stuff. But that doesn't mean that has to be day to day. There'd be a trigger point. So the big discussion is, where is that trigger? Is it the next worldwide pandemic, or is it a rainstorm tomorrow night? So obviously the answer is probably somewhere in the middle, but there's time now to talk about it, and it's a lot better to do it now than the next time it happens. And I would also submit to you that after all these disasters that the three of us have seen in DC, nothing ever happens until after 5 o'clock on a Friday night, or holiday weekend. It's never convenient. Okay, we'll just get together and have time to do that. So because of this responsibility and authority gap, that's how we've written our improvement plan. And you'll see that the improvement plan is written sequentially to enable success, not in order of importance of, number one is the most important. Number one is the first step in the path to get you to 16 steps. The third bucket was communications. And communications is, again, how did they do during the response? Were people confused? Were they not confused? And the good news is the more people heard from the FRCOG, the better they had a perception of the FRCOG. And we have a 94-page report, shows the answer to every one of these surveys and everything. That is not to be confused with how did you perceive the communications from the Commonwealth or the federal government. And everybody unanimously thought that was confusing, changing, conflicting, and there's nothing that this room or this VTC can do anything about at that level. We put that in the category of fact of life. But from internally, the communications reception led to a better perception of the FRCOG. Okay, next slide, please. I'm going to turn this over to Scott.
Okay, on the findings we found, as Bill talked about, we separated into the three major areas of value, obligation, responsibility, and communication. Each of the survey finding areas summarizes the significant results, the data, the analysis to supplement the results that hits basically that the FRCOG did very well, given a good charter for planning and daily activities, plus the flexibility that you had under Linda and the staff to respond proactively to the pandemic. So the bottom line is on these points is FRCOG provided value to the county during the response of COVID-19. Given the void in defined county responsibilities in a disaster, since we don't have county government anymore in our Commonwealth. Individuals all stated that FRCOG does have a responsibility to respond. They need more authority to meet this obligation, but this is not a wholesale submission by a town or a city of all the authority, just blanket to the FRCOG. So the city and the towns want to have input and a response based upon their own capabilities, their responsibilities, and their own ability to respond. Creating an emergency management function within the FRCOG will definitely help define some of these roles and help streamline responsibilities during a response. And lastly, communication is definitely a key component in coordinating and presenting a clear response. FRCOG has multiple agencies messaging that at times was confusing because people didn't really know who was in charge and who to go to get answers and information, especially given higher authority guidance, which in my mind refers to the Commonwealth and HHS and DHS and DHA and some of those agencies, as well as the federal government, wasn't always clear, and accordingly that made the response for a lot of the communities and the county less effective. So now for the next slide, if you go to the next slide, I'll hand it over to Brian to talk about our findings. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Scott. So this is just a sample of some of the comments we got. So I want to talk generally what we learned from the interviews, and I'll try to keep it at a high level. Now, these aren't all inclusive, and of course, you as individuals and you as a group may have different thoughts, and you know how it is. It's where you sit is where you stand as far as what's the most important. But there were two overarching themes that came out through our interviews. And the first is that I'm reading part of this because I want to make sure I get it right. They did a very good job at recognizing what gaps in services and information were occurring or going to occur. And the FRCOG also recognized that they were not set up officially to fill these gaps. They kind of took a chance. but they had the courage to do that and become operational. And were they perfect? Did they get everything? They did dot every I and cross every T? No, absolutely not. But they did a lot. And the most important thing is they became the go-to organization when people couldn't find help elsewhere. So keep that in mind. When they couldn't find help elsewhere, they went to the FRCOG. The real value was that in many cases, there was no other organization that existed in the western part of Massachusetts that could do what they thought or could do what they did. The second of the two themes was that Franklin County, you've got a lot of talent in the city and every town. It's amazing. And that talent helped you get through the pandemic. And of course, the bigger the town is, and of course, the city, you have more capabilities. And so you needed less help from the FRCOG. But we found that every town had dedicated, experienced people in various positions that know what to do in a crisis. And they know the other people in other towns that could help them augment their capabilities if they didn't have enough. So they knew where to go. And so they could fill their capability gaps that way if they couldn't always go to the FRCOG. All right, there were some issues, obviously, everybody knows that. A few are on the slide. So many of your response organizations depend on volunteers. And even some of you that are paid, you have 4 or 5 hats. So really, how are you going to keep filling that pipeline of volunteers? That was a concern raised a couple of times, right? How do you replenish it? And again, some of you out there are doing 2, 3, 4, 5 jobs. And by that one limit you somewhat, because you might have had this job for your town, you might have an area job. Which one do you do? So it became kind of a conflict in a way, because you may not have had enough people to do that. There were communication limitations. We've talked about that for a while. It took a while for the FRCOG to set up a robust communication entity. And as we know, not everybody communicates through the same medium. But if you're 20, you have one way of communicating. And if you're my age, let's just pretend I'm not much over 60, then you have a different way, right? I mean, I still read newspapers if I can get them. And guy 20's never heard of a newspaper, but they know it existed somewhere in a museum. Another thing is you were getting Commonwealth and federal information that might have been delayed and might have been conflicting between different organizations. And a lot of you have talked about that, right? At the Commonwealth area, MEMA and Department of Public Health. Even today, I think their websites don't talk to each other. You have to go 2 different places, and sometimes the communication or what you're getting is conflicting. So taking a look at the future and the possibility of a similar or different but more destructive crisis, and we hope it doesn't occur, there were a wide range of ideas of how to ensure the FRCOG was best postured to respond. Most did feel that the FRCOG needs some kind of operational authority, but not day to day. Everybody was concerned about that, but an authority responsibility that would be activated during a crisis. There would be some trigger for that. The towns wanted this authority to be strictly controlled and to not impinge on their abilities to take care of their citizens. And through our interviews, we found support for an emergency management department that would produce contingency plans and work with all the FRCOG programs and all the towns in the city to help develop an all hazards response capability. Many interviewees made it clear they wanted an independent look at both the emergency management department and an increase in FRCOG authorities. No different than you wanted maybe an independent look here at what happened. Finally, a little bit of my editorial, if you bear with me. All right, you did pay us to be here, no doubt about it. But we really believe in integrity. And if you ask anybody that worked for us, they got the honest truth sometimes that they didn't really appreciate. But if you tell the truth at all times, you stay out of trouble. So this is not a fake compliment. But at every turn, it was amazing. We found that somebody in Franklin County was going above and beyond and doing whatever it took, working with whomever it took to help his or her fellow citizen. And I guess you guys know that, but you're from here, but it was just amazing. Some of you guys were paid, some were not, but none were paid for everything you all did. So you should be rightfully proud of how your whole county responded, not just the FRCOG, but all of you, every town, every city. It was quite impressive. So we appreciate it being part of that, even a small part of just what you've done. So I'll turn over to you, Bill, and that concludes my comments.
Thank you, and well put. So next slide, please. The focus group, we did 3 focus groups of people from the staff to then try to fill in the gaps to where we got between surveys and for the interviews. And he's already covered one. I'll just go quickly. It's a firm belief that you need to have both emergency preparedness and emergency response, that they are different. You need to define when you transition from one to the other, and that all plans should be all hazards, because you never know what the next thing is going to be to come down the pipe. A lot about the flu shots. So I'm sorry, the COVID shot. The COVID shot is different than the flu shot. The COVID shot, they were trying to get needles in arms as fast as possible, because there was a belief, and I do believe it, that it saved lives. Whereas a flu shot, somewhere around late September, October, CVS says, hey, we start getting flu shots, whenever it's convenient, come in and try to get it before December. That wasn't the rush that occurred here. And everything short of a food fight. And my understanding is you had people coming from Boston to stand in your lines to get flu shots for people from here who couldn't go to Boston because of either age, transportation, everything. There was we could probably spend the entire evening just on that, and we're not going to do that. But it was a very difficult problem. Everyone did as well as they could, but it is completely different than giving flu shots. Another confusing factor was that the Commonwealth decided to handle all 351 boards of health as individual entities, and one size does not fit all. The city of Boston, I can imagine, has an entire full-time staff, where some of your cities, it's a part-time job, a volunteer job, or it's your fourth additional duty, as we'd say in the military. So there was definitely some issues with that. The Franklin County does have, I'll say, more than its share of different medical consortiums. So I just counted up 7. If we need to in the question and answer, Mark has maps of those, but I believe every one of them was built for a good reason. But you actually have some towns outside the county that are in Franklin County. You have some Franklin County towns that what will I say, they scrimmage with another county. They were all good reasons when they happened, but it's probably time to take a hard look, step back, and put everybody in the same bucket. And the advantage of that is you'll reduce meetings, you'll increase effectiveness. And again, we could spend an entire evening on that. But even the people who work here don't fully understand all the differences of who pays, who doesn't pay, which service. And then when everybody needed services, hey, I've been paying for services, they have not been paying for services, lots of friction. So I think that's something that we can definitely dive deeper into another time, if that's all right. The emergency dispensing sites, you have 9. They practiced for 20 years, and when the big game came, they said, don't use them. Yeah. They were mad. If it was me, I'd be mad too. I mean, why have this? Why have people who know what they're doing and practice with their heart and soul into it not use it? It was a Commonwealth decision, but that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. So the next time around, we need to be able to say, hey, we are ready. Here's why. It's our community. We're going to handle our community. Pick an acronym. CDC, AHS, DPH, NEMA. Everybody was giving different guidance, and the FRCOG did the best they could to deconflict and buffer between these conflicting guidances. But I suspect there was a lot of hours put on cell phones for people after hours trying to figure out what did they really mean there.
Usually Fridays after 5.
After 5. Holiday Fridays.
Because the governor liked to announce the big changes.
Yes,
Fridays
after
at around
noon.
5.
Yep. Yep.
In DC, they do that when they don't really want it to get on the paper and the press and the Sunday morning shows, and that's when they do that. The last thing is what they didn't tell us, but became obvious. There was a lot of good work done here in innovation. And I'll give you one example. So the guidance for restaurant opening and closing was changed all the time. And the FRCOG figured out that they had a health department email list of all the restaurants because they had to tell them, when their inspection was coming and everything. And they used that channel to tell the restaurants effectively, okay, you can have 25% occupancy, 50% occupancy. And I can only multiply that times 100 with the innovation used by the folks on the staff. So they tried their hardest, and there was some good work going on. Okay, so that's how we came to our conclusion that then as Ardent, we had a big offsite and said, okay, what did we learn? What would we suggest? And so now we're going to transition from learning to suggesting. So next slide, please. There you go. So we do this every time in the military after either combat or a defense support to civilian authorities. We do an after action review. We have a meeting. What did we learn? And we try to improve. And this is the point where there's, you need to discuss this. This is our suggestion. We think it would get you from A to Z, but it doesn't mean you have to take that exact route. But we'll tell you what we think. And again, these are in the order of how you need to do them, not what's most important. Because when you build a house, You don't pour the foundation last. You have to pour the foundation first, and then you put the footer, and then you go to the first floor. So it's kind of like that. We're building that in the sequence you would build a house. So what we have is 16 suggestions. 12 are at the county level, 3 at the Commonwealth level, and 1 at the federal level. And as you can tell, the farther you get from this room, the less influence you're going to be able to have. It'd be nice to be able to tell the Commonwealth what to do, but I think you have the standing to do that. At the federal level, maybe, maybe not. But if you don't ask, you never know. We've divided these suggestions into short and long term. And you'll see why, because some things you can do pretty quickly, and some things, like an exercise program, is a 5-year program. You're not going to be able to, change that tonight. And then every place we could, we went for all hazards. We went with the National Response Framework and FEMA doctrine. And we're really good at that. We know that really well. We lived it all the time. And the more that you can make your phone book match everybody else's phone book, the better off you'll be in an emergency. All right. The other 5 things that we came up with to guide ourselves to the improvement plan was, the first one is don't base everything on the last event. In the military, we would call it don't fight the last war. Yeah, you had COVID, but that doesn't mean you're going to have COVID the next time. And you need to think all hazards, all hazards, all hazards. The next one is incremental change. There's actually a whole study on this called the Overton window and all this stuff, but basically it makes sense. Everyone here, we live in a free country. You had one dictator and said, do it this way, you could change a lot of things very quickly. But that's not the society we live in, and that provides some checks and balances. So you're not going to change on a dime. It's going to be an incremental change. You can also change, look, and have some kind of fail-safe points if you think that's important. But change is important, but it's not going to happen overnight. Buy-in is important. So we could tell you, here's the plan, here it is, and I don't think it would sit very well. But if I sit with you in a room, explain it, and then listen to everybody, and then we'll probably come up with even a better way to do it. That's probably how you're going to get success, buy-in, and continued application throughout the years and years and years. So we do think buy-in is very important. So we're not here to jam this down your throat. We're here to start the discussion with this, not to end the discussion. It works the same way with the National Guard, the active duty military, the FBI, the state police, the local police. Everybody wants to be in charge. So there's times when you don't have to be in charge. You just have to all cooperate and move towards the same goalpost. So unity of effort is weighted heavier than unity of command. So there is no intent for someone to come in and take over somebody's town. We just want to help all the citizens that we can. So you'll see this as, again, so whether you call it a soft approach or not, but you'll never see language from us to say that the executive director becomes, or actually in this case, I'm sorry, the council chair becomes the king or queen of Franklin County. It doesn't need to be that way, and probably, well, careful what you ask for.
Should be a lovely thing.
You'll be in People magazine. Every word you say will be on the press. It's not so good. And then the last thing is, recognize what you can and cannot change. And I think you can affect what goes on with the Commonwealth. I'm not sure you can get to the national level, but we'll see. So, all right. So number 1, not a wholesale change of authority, but at some threshold, I think it's appropriate. We think it's appropriate that modified authorities allow response and dictate response. And that also applies to funding too. If you get funding, what is that funding for? If it's for planning, can you spend it on response? Whether or not it happened, there was a void, people had to do it. But the big thing you learn when you get to a certain level in DC is what's my authority and what's the funding authority? Because they have to go together, because without the second one, the first one doesn't do you any good. If you don't think there should be any authority to do operations, then I would ask that you write that down and say so. It's unfair to put people in a situation where, there's a void and you're standing back to do something, not do something. If there's things that you don't want people to do, that should be stated too, because now we've seen what is probably the next to worst thing that could happen. Probably, a nuke going off and taking out the whole county is probably the next worst thing, but this affected every single person. And one of the reasons why this affected the countywide so much is usually if one town gets hit, all the other towns help out, send people over and stuff. Everybody was hit, so there was not as much sharing going on, and that's where the central point of focus for operations came into. The other thing that about the COVID response is my understanding that 4 of your 5 key people have either moved to different jobs or moving outside the organization. And we counted it up, that's 29 years worth of experience that won't be there next time. If 2 or 3 of those folks had vacationed to the island of Tonga, which is near New Zealand, they closed their borders for 18 months. If you were in country, you were stuck there. If you had 2 or 3 people stuck in Tonga, would you have been able to do this response? Maybe, maybe not. But it's probably best to write this down, add a little structure, add a little agreements, so that when this happens the next time, your younger staff will be able to handle that. Lastly, Brian, Scott, and I have worked in the Pentagon collectively. I ended up for 18 years. We know a power grab when we see it. They try it all the time. I could go on for hours about what happens down in that 5-sided building. We sincerely do not believe this is a power grab. We believe this is just a request for someone to define what the right thing to do is. Okay, next one, please. Once you've decided what the role should be, there should be a little time to go back and say, okay, where's the staff now before we change it? How did it get there? What's the reason? What did someone do? So you don't just start changing everything just to change it. But with the third one here, one more, please. We're certain the one thing that, well, there's 2 for certain we see that as clear paths. And the first one is to get a department or a program of emergency management. Emergency management would be preparation and response. And that way it's crystal clear. If you look at your planning, or if you look at the Word document right now, and again, they all happen for good reasons and everything, but you have things that are not necessarily aligned with a 2022 world. They probably were that way in 2000 or something, but they need to move around, and it would be a lot clearer if you had a Department of Emergency Management. Next slide, please. We bring up the single all hazards emergency playbook for 2 reasons. First of all, it forces you to write a plan. And it's kind of like an inspection or like the finance audit. Everyone sweats the finance audit, but it comes out good. But would you have dotted every T if you didn't have an audit? We do the same thing with inspections in the military. Why do we get an inspection every 3 years? Because it makes you be better. Well, when you have this plan, you have to have it. The second thing is when you have a playbook written down that everyone knows to expect what is and isn't going to happen. And I'll give you a really simple example. The Civil Air Patrol, I had 9 jobs, and one of them was I owned the Civil Air Patrol, 1,400 airplanes, 60,000 people, bigger than American Airlines. And they have a book you can go to. I paste it in the backup, but it gives you the phone number, what they can do, what it costs to get. Somebody has to pay for it. Usually it's FEMA, but it's 1-200 reconnaissance aircraft, and how fast they can respond and such like that. There's all sorts of those playbooks out there for FEMA and all capabilities of the U.S. military, and it would probably be helpful if you had one, what you can do here. How many fire trucks do you have in the county? If you have a really big fire, we can handle it, or if it gets too big, you can't. But tell somebody what you can do. How many hospital beds you have? I think it was 96 if my memory is correct. But if it goes more than that, what are you going to do? You're going to go down to Springfield. What's the next best place to go? That type of thing. And it also, again, tells you a contact. And when you write this, please don't put a name and an email use an organizational address because people change jobs, and that way the email never changes. All right, next slide, please. The second department would probably put all of public health in public health, because having it split between different areas is just not helpful, especially when things go poorly. And again, this is exactly which person and where is to be discussed, but that's our suggestion, that you have emergency management and public health, and then you're going to see we want them to talk to each other a lot. Then I think the next response will go smoother. Next slide, please. Okay. Multi-agency coordination center. You have one. It's probably needs to be used more and stood up earlier. And this is exactly how big things happen in DC. The presidential inaugural has a MAC. It's very effective. When you're in a MAC, really nobody's in charge, but there's nothing like sitting next to somebody and go, no, I can solve that. Wait, who told you that? No, and that's the whole reason of getting all the people in the same room, and it really solves problems well and fast. It's already in your plans. We're suggesting that you just beef it up a little bit. Next slide, please. Okay, you have a regional emergency planning committee. The same thing, beef that up and then put the two big departments under there, and everybody will be talking at the same time. And if you look at all the different organizations you have, this would streamline your meetings too. I can't imagine how many people go to similar but different meetings here. And I think this would just help efficiency wise, and also from a response standpoint, this would help a lot. All right, next one, please. Number 8. Okay, you think this is pretty close to 5, but it's slightly different. So an example would be you want to have a vaccine clinic, and this is the perfect location to have it. But if you don't talk to other people, the traffic jam caused by the vaccine clinic just block the entrance to the fire department and they can't respond. This is the type of thing where a holistic approach to this planning would help a lot of people. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, probably the simple answer is you basically have done no exercises in 2 years due to COVID. I can't, if I hear that one more time on a recording on a phone, but exercises are really important, and they're important for a number of reasons. First of all, you get new people, so you got to cycle them through. Second of all, it gets the cobwebs out. And the third reason is that a good exercise program will start slow, crawl, walk, run, and build everybody's proficiency better. And I guess I should have mentioned the fourth one, that the wrong time to be exchanging business cards is at this disaster scene, right? If you don't know somebody, it doesn't work as well. Your exercise plan, through no fault of your own, has been totally blown up. So that needs to be reevaluated and reset.
Mark,
that's okay. I'm talking faster than I thought, so I'll try to keep up with you, Mark. This process for communications probably would have helped even better. We've learned the hard way in the military that a coordinated communication is a lot better, because what you could do is send out guidance with no funding. You could send out guidance that causes a problem for somebody else. You could send out conflicting guidance that somebody else just sent out 10 minutes prior. And if you actually have somebody with a pen and that one person has to sign off, or that one office has to sign off, that the other offices have been coordinated, you'll get a much better product. We probably had a third of our complaints about inconsistent communication. In this case, probably not anybody's fault, because a lot of that came from up high. And one of the ways maybe to solve that is to send out at the same time that MEMA says this and DPH says that, and we're trying to adjudicate that, is different than sending out this and then that, and everyone now, what are we gonna do about that? It's just a higher level of staffing process that would make things go better. Next slide, please. Okay, so PPE was hit very hard, and for good reasons in the beginning. I mean, we all go on to Amazon, we can get a mask in a day. Well, when this started, it was like, you can't get a mask ever. So there's a lot of issues with that, but there's things like shelf life, reordering and everything. So now that things have slowed down a little bit, it's probably worth diving back into that and trying to encourage the state not to use 2 different systems for bleach and masks to order. But while you're doing that, you might want to think just a little bit bigger and also go not just infectious disease, but what about radiological and all hazards? And I don't know how many bunny suits you have and stuff, but this may not be the only type of equipment that you need to have on hand. You need inventory, you need to check shelf life, and sometimes it's as simple as you got to change the batteries in something. But it's important, and when it doesn't happen, it's failure and potentially a loss of life. All right, next slide, please. The health alliances are at least 7, and as I alluded to earlier, we probably ought to just take a clean sheet of paper and go, what would this look like if we started this today? And there's still gonna be some towns that don't need to be in the Public Health Alliance. I don't know what you're gonna do about the towns that scrimmage with the other county, or the ones from the other county who they feel kicked out if you said, no, you actually need to go over there towards Worcester or something. I don't know, but it's a difficult conversation, but life would be a lot easier to the extent possible, everybody was aligned with the county line. And because I don't know why you wouldn't do it that way. Next, please. All right, so I'm gonna ask Scott to handle the Commonwealth because of his familiarity, and he'll be able to get this all done.
Okay, hey, thanks a lot, Bill. And from my point of view, the Commonwealth, across the agencies from NEMA to DBH to HHS are all conducting after-action reviews, and on their response under the governor and the legislative body. In all these areas, certainly the FRCOG has a voice and should, actively participate, which you are in many cases, to drive the agenda so that, concerns, issues that we've talked about already and more to come with FRCOG can be addressed appropriately. The reviews that the Commonwealth is doing is going to take time and patience to see the real change. Part of it is we're going to get a new administration in the Commonwealth this fall since the governor's not running, and so things are kind of in a lame duck pause situation where nobody wants to do a lot. That we're going to talk a lot, but not do a lot until after the new administration is in place. And then that's on one side. And then the other side is letting, as we've seen time and time again, Boston and the large population there just unilaterally drive change that helps and affects Boston as a big community, but very, very less, less responsive or effective for the rural communities like we have in Franklin. Next slide. So engaging across this, to make sure that the Commonwealth has a perspective on both the urban and the rural, communities will have a positive impact. But as we've seen, the EDS, the distribution sites decision by the state, had a positive effect where they thought there was limited vaccines, but also had a huge negative effect on some place like the FRCOG, who has done a lot of planning with some of the communities on how to do that. And so within Franklin County, there's a whole different dynamic based upon the size, the population, staffing, training, economic health and welfare of the communities and towns is a big deal that needs to be addressed. Next slide. So participating in legislation is a part, and legislation is coming. Certainly active engagement with your state senator, which you know very well, and your two legislators will really have a positive impact for the county, because as some of you know, that Senator Joe Comfort is the chairperson of two pretty significant joint committees in this area for the Commonwealth and on the Senate. One's the Committee on COVID-19 and the Emergency Preparedness and Management, which is a big deal in the heart of what we're talking about. Plus, she's on the Committee for Public Health as a chair too. So both of those are very influential joint committees across not only the Senate, but the whole legislative body, which is a big deal. And I talked to our staff recently, and they are definitely working on very proactive legislation that will address issues and needs on counties like Franklin County. And so I've also worked a lot with Senator Walter Timilty in my role as the Adjutant General, and he's the chairperson on Joint Committee on Public Safety and Homeland Security, which is where I worked with him a lot. And we collectively together put in a lot of legislation in Massachusetts that I think has done some good across the whole Commonwealth, not just in Boston. Next slide, please. And this is my last point. And this is the point where we didn't delve into very much. And this is our federal recommendation. I think collectively, all the people in the room and in the county have significant more knowledge than we do as a group from the military on federal grant funding and all those things. I mean, you just already talked about it at the beginning of the meeting. You know, you've already had 2 info sessions and you got 3 more coming up. And I think those are a big deal because there's a lot of money out there. And if you frame it right, present it right, then you know, you can go forward. One of the problems I've seen personally with federal funding is again, federal funding doesn't recognize where Massachusetts is as the Commonwealth without county government. A lot of federal funding goes to counties, and Massachusetts doesn't have that formal county structure to tap into that. But that said, it's still not impossible to get after it. And I you know, encourage and recommend that we continue down that path. But I think you're already way, way ahead of us on that. Now, back to Bill for his final comments and our final slides. Thank you.
Thanks. Next slide, Mark. All right, we told you we were gonna, and hang in there, only 2 more slides. We told you that every place we could, we followed the FEMA standard and the National Response Framework. This is their HESEP, the Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Program. It looks really complicated, but who's seen the movie The Lion King? This is nothing more than the circle of life. You do big thinking, you come up with a plan, you either practice it or do it for real, and then you evaluate it. So if you look at the red arrow, that's where you are right now. Finalize and distribute action improvement plan, which means the next step is to implement improvements and corrective actions. That's the next step. So I'm not going to read to you the left side of the slide, but it's been a long evening. I think we can sum up really quickly. Decide, act, and exercise. And that will get you to the next level of response and everything. Next slide, please. Okay, so we come from levels of leadership. All leaders have a responsibility to understand what they did well, what didn't go well, and to improve that. And I'm sure you will act on some of these to do that. I don't know what exactly the right answer is here, but I know what the wrong answer is to do nothing. You get to a certain level in the military where you do nothing, you actually get in trouble. You're supposed to be biased towards action as a leader and an organizer. So I think the citizens of Franklin County expect you to do something. You don't have to do exactly what we did say, but you should at least have the grand conversation. And it's going to take some time, but it needs to occur. Organizations that don't change can end up like Pan Am, Blockbuster, Radio Shack, or the BlackBerry. I mean, you can be great, but you have to keep being great. You have to keep doing that over and over and over. And the last thing I'll say is you're going to get a ticket, get a speeding ticket, not a parking ticket, because there's people's lives at stake when some of this stuff happens. So we did a study of all the other surrounding counties, and this was a horrible event, but due to the hard work of the people here, Yankee ingenuity and resiliency, you did as well or better than the other people. And that's not to brag on them, but it's just to compliment you. So thank you for having me here today.
Thank you.
I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, gentlemen. We're going to open it up to questions and discussion. Let me head off some of the possible comments with 3 quick statements. Number 1, we view this after action review as a path for further discussion, and that discussion is with all of you. Number 2, I am sure that there are some of you out there that could be wondering or concerned or convinced that any change in responsibility or authority will result in more cost to municipalities. I hope that you know through our response during COVID that we are committed to providing quality service to the towns of Franklin County as efficiently and effectively and with as least cost as possible. And we haven't said this enough, but in the last year of county government, the county assessment to towns was $660,000. Today, 25 years later, the membership assessment to Franklin County towns is $177,000 less than it was in the last year of county government. We are committed to financial stewardship. We are committed to providing good service, and we are not trying to create an empire or unnecessarily increase costs. And then finally, I know that I've already heard from some of you that you're not supportive of the creation of a Department of Public Health. You're worried it will result in increased costs or that we will force our public health agents and nurses on you. I will say that we have purposefully deployed Phoebe to be a strong statewide advocate for local public health needs so that the state recognizes its responsibility to municipalities when it comes to public health. And there has been results with that already. We have doubled the size of our public health service, and our budget is only 40% funded by municipalities now. The rest is grant funded. And we have already received another 3-year grant that helps us provide countywide public health services, which is one of the things that Bill's AAR talked about so much, that we need to fix clarity between what does the COG do related to public health and what's the difference between that and what does CPHS do related to public health. And this grant is one of the first ways that we will actively look at that and actively work with you to clarify the differences between membership in CPHS and overall COG activities. That did not take 30 seconds. I'm sorry. Now we are opening it to comments and questions. Is that
Yes,
okay?
please. Yes, please. How do we want to do this? Somebody raise their hand, and I don't know if you can moderate who's got a hand up. Happy to take questions. And well, it's a huge topic, right? And everybody's going to want to talk, or maybe people want to talk a very long time. Please take the time to get your point across, but try to keep it as concise as we can so that we can get as many questions in as possible.
But an acceptable response would be, that's the most articulate, brilliant briefing we've ever heard, and we couldn't possibly have a question. That's an acceptable answer.
Yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that is an excellent
Crickets?
response. Yes.
Crickets?
I never got that from Bill and Scott when I worked for them, but I'm still shooting.
So happy to open it up for comments and questions. Tom, because you're right in the room and I see your hand.
I just want to say thank you for the report. I agree that we don't have a county structure, and this response needed that county structure. I would say, in my opinion, I think that the FRCOG did above and beyond what anybody would have anticipated. One of the steps that I would try to improve on is that there were some things like the EDSs. South County was set. We were ready to roll on day one. We had been practicing for 11 years. You guys didn't use us to the best of our ability, in my opinion.
Sir, I totally agree. I believe that's a state-driven decision and not a FRCOG decision.
It is, and I actually, it's not. When I say you didn't use us, it means level above us.
Yeah, and
they did because we were ready.
Yep,
we had been practicing. We had started we had done desktops. We had done small. We had done flu shots. We had started off with small EDSs in each of our elementary schools. Then we recognized the fact that it may not work. We went outdoors. Then we said, well, geez, the outdoors is good, but what happens if there's a lot of wind? So we actually went in buildings. We were there, and we felt that we weren't utilized to the best of our abilities.
And I agree. Part of the this is Scott Rice talking, and part of the things we found, and this is more from my experience with a state and the Commonwealth, that a couple agencies and a couple of cabinet level areas, they tend to, in making decisions, make them easier by saying, hey, I'm going to make a black and white decision. In this case, the state under HHS said, we're going to take a poll of all the towns and say, are you ready to distribute or not? And they simply went with a majority. The majority of towns and cities said, we're not ready. If you look at 351, we probably had a handful that were really ready. And the bulk of them were in Franklin County, frankly speaking. So they made a black and white decision to do a centralized distribution, and they discounted all the work that communities. And I tell you, you're not the only voice. There's other counties that are just not happy with the way that transpired, that we see that with a FRCOG and what they can present to the state, particularly through your senator as she does the legislation, is there is not a all or nothing black and white answer. It's a range of answers, and say, I would ask state, put out your criteria and then let us decide if we meet the criteria or not. And let something like Franklin County have the authority to say, hey, you're a town, you've got almost the criteria that the state wants you to meet. Yeah, we can decide and we can help you get to the next step and do it, or no. And that's a much better way to do it that I found with the state. And I think the Commonwealth is recognizing it and moving that direction. So hard lesson learned, we all learned, but that's the direction we went in.
So before we get a lot of this for Art and Decisions Group, I want to remind everybody, we came in just to look at how you did, what went on, and the reason that went on internally. We talked about it. We put in a report that is kind of molded and directed our improvement plan. But as far as how you guys did and who should have done what, I just want to make sure that is probably not for us to discuss. I know that Bill and Catfish, we could discuss it with you, but we weren't there. And that's why you see our solution is to avoid some of those things, confusion. Let's go back and reorganize. That's our recommendation, and that'll avoid all the problems, many of the problems that before. But I want to make sure we don't get in the middle of who did what to whom, because we weren't there, and that's not really the purpose of our briefing. Just want to remind you, if you care about our personal opinion, we'll give it to you offline.
Good call, Brian. And also, I would say too, this is not a end discussion with us. We're after tonight, we're not completely gone. This is an ongoing discussion that it transpires even beyond the meeting tonight.
Thank you. I see Sarah Reynolds' camera up, but
It's Marguerite.
That's Marguerite. Yes, hi, Marguerite.
Yeah, we both signed on.
Yes, sure. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you. I understand the findings, and I think what I'm hearing is that the role of FRCOG might be defined differently than what it currently is. But my underlying question, even though the Arden firm says they're not fighting the last war, the focus seems to be mostly on health. And in terms of emergency preparedness, there's a whole list of things that could happen, such as a dam break in Franklin County or in West County. So this may sound silly, but I really need someone to define what you mean by public health. What comes under that jurisdiction? And I think that's part of the conflicts that I saw as a local official between the Board of Health and other organizations at the regional level and at the state level. And that may seem a little elementary, but if we're looking to serve the public, they should have a clear understanding of what's involved in public health. And I would say at this point, I could not tell you what that is.
Are you asking us? Or are you asking Linda, or who are you asking?
Well, you wanted comments on the report, so I don't know. It's a comment. I think the report that FRCOG can define that if they're going further. If they're going to be asking the communities to give them authority, then we need an explanation of what constitutes public health.
Yeah. So, Marguerite, I think one response I have is that while I think what Ardent tried very hard to do was recognize that the AAR was looking back at a public health emergency, but we should not assume the next emergency is a public health emergency. So that is part of why we should be strengthening the REPC. We should be creating an emergency management department. I think your question about defining public health is an excellent question. And I would argue that the definition of public health has changed in the last 2 years because of what we've learned from COVID. And so I think you make a strong point that trying to wrap our hands around what is public health and what are other emergencies is going to be part of our future.
You saw Bill. And you saw Bill talk about that, right? The 7 organizations. So we agree 100%. You know, our whole theory of this is that going back to emergency management, that's just the title of an organization, right? I mean, we do the military all the time. Then you know, if you have an emergency, you go, what is that emergency? If it's an earthquake, then your earthquake guys come in, right? If it's a big fires, the fire guys are the guys you mostly talk to. If it's public health, that is. We do agree you need to figure out public health, because we heard that over and over again. And I don't want to point, but one of the women that are on this, she could say it, but she said, I didn't know who was talking to me. Was it public health? Was it the district? Was it the FRCOG? And the word health came up. So we 100% agree. And you'll see that's our comment. And we would assist you in that if you so choose. But we agree with you. And you can see that your question is kind of in a big vein, and as Bill outlined in our whole report, right? What is public health? Who does it? Who does it when? Who talks to whom here? And that's something we encourage you, like Bill said, to put all your organizations together to figure out how you want to do it under one hat, because it shouldn't be confusing for you, because you're part of the FRCOG. And if you don't know, who does, right? So
I think somebody had talked about maps as well, of like all these different entities that we have, MAPCO and, you know, the public health. They're all districts, they're all kind of overlapping. And as you said, some are outside the county and some are in. And it does get very confusing as to who was speaking at the first time and who was handling what. And I do think that's a huge takeaway from this, is that we really need one centralized look at this. But then as you have a centralized look of where we are, what entities can handle things better than others? And how do we, I guess when we talk about authority, what are we asking? What would we be authorizing, and what kind of autonomy the different communities would still have to that? And I've always felt like, looking at this from the back, is that we need a centralized infrastructure. Like, where do we store PPE? Where do we deploy from? Where do we have meetings, about this stuff? That's always, we've got some stuff in a dilapidated church. We've got some stuff in a storage lot. Like, we've got stuff everywhere and not really centralized. There's no central, I think that's like where we need state money to kind of say, we need a building so that we can store stuff, we can centralize from, we can deploy from, we can train at. That seems to be more of a, without a county seat, there really is nowhere to do that. We all kind of put a little piece of each other into it, but it would be helpful to have that. Oh, it's Steve. Yes, do you have a comment?
Sure. Yeah, if you don't mind.
Sure, please.
I'm actually going to look at my notes because I found the presentation really interesting, and I really want to appreciate sort of the structure and the approach that you all took to developing your findings. As I think about this, it's kind of an important moment because it's in the aftermath of, moments like this, that there's actually some greater capacity for change and openness to that. And I guess I would encourage us to make a really strategic decision relative to, are we trying to develop capacity from the standpoint of decision structures and resource agreements, and setting the foundation for being able to act in a well-coordinated manner that respects the strong local governance role that will not change moving forward, or do we look at a more capital-intensive plan? And I guess my bias clearly is towards building the human infrastructure and the governance infrastructure that would allow this to work forward. And as I thought about it, I thought, well, what were the huge gaps that Montague realized it had? And part of it's project management, and I'll call that leadership capacity. Okay, it's expertise. It's having the right kind of, we don't hire all of our different department head positions because they're FEMA grade planners, whether it's DPW or police or what have you. We get excellent operational people for our normal situations. That's what we focus on. So having that project management capacity is really, really important. And supporting that is understanding what operational capacity exists. In town government, people are playing very, very specific roles. There's a very few of them, and almost all of them are doing some activity that is required to keep the town moving. I don't know how similar or different it is at FRCOG, but as a planning organization, you may have more flexibility to redeploy. And if you have a plan around how you would redeploy to create operational capacity, not all of the operational capacity, but some of it, I think that'd be helpful. From the governance and decision-making structure, it feels to me like there's a new opportunity for memorandums of agreement and decisional structures to be considered that plan for the operational moment. I would attend meetings, and I'm an agent of the select board, subject to the limitations of the Board of Health's ability to make its own decisions. And so we had multiple voices that were difficult to reconcile. And I feel like we could kind of work out some elements of this, like how would communities contribute to a decisional structure, and how would they, in that decisional structure, have a voice? And that voice might be to withdraw, right? It may be that when the moment comes and it's this or that, we don't act. But once that decision's made, it's clear, and you move on from it. I also think that there's the resource sharing and financial agreements that need to be there. We see this with fire, and we see that we have, interagency task forces at the police level for narcotics investigations and et cetera. And so I think that there are real models for that. And, we all know how many fire trucks, how many dump trucks, how many, of this, that, and the other thing we have. And I feel like we should anticipate that. And lastly, and it was well commented on, is just sort of having communication structures and strategies. And so if you're doing emergency planning, and if you have that kind of, I'll call it flexible capacity, I don't know what all hazards are, and I don't know that everybody is good at everything, but certainly from a planning and logistical standpoint and an understanding of how to make governance structures work, we could find someone perhaps who fits that role. So I know I've spoken too much, and I apologize for that, but I just think that it's about those are the things that trip us up. At the end of the day, you're only going to have so many masks, and you might not need it. And we don't need a storage locker full of radiation suits if in fact it's a biological agent and not radiation. And we can't anticipate, and we can't throw money at those things necessarily. So if we create that human and those governance infrastructure, we can at least be better positioned to respond in a better coordinated fashion. That's kind of where I would encourage us to move. And I think a lot of that sensibility is reflected in the report. And that's my comments.
Thanks,
Thank
Steve.
you. Thank you very much. Are there other comments? People want to speak? Not all at once?
Trevor?
Please.
One thing I think that was done exceptionally well is the communications that came out from the COG to the different towns. Case in point, when we started talking about PPE and the purchase of PPE, I mean, it came, a concern came up through the towns to the FRCOG about having PPE supplying to the businesses. The COG come up with a plan, disseminated that plan out to the staff pretty quickly, and asked our council for approval and recommendation of PERC. I mean, for a democratic function as we are, that was pretty amazing to me, that you had so many things in place, ready to go to talk to us about all in a very short period of time.
Thank you.
And well, that is that. I mean, you think about it, how hard is that? And to get 30 of us or 27 of us to think and to respond. And then on top of that, when the program had played itself out, you recognize it and brought it back to the council about discontinuing it in a timely fashion as well.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's pretty good.
It was. We did a lot well. There's no doubt about that. We did a lot well. Carolyn?
I think it really I just wanted to bring up that it's really technical assistance, which seemed like was really what we need, not massive people, but it was the vaccine management. It was the reporting system. We shifted from a paper system that we always use to online system, and they wanted us to be trained on prep mod, and then they changed to color. And, South County was able to do that, and we do have trained people, but vaccine management is a huge issue. And I think there has to be some way that the county can expand if is there an event, and then decompress, when there isn't an event, some way to have the technical assistance to do. You can only do so much with volunteers. Anybody that's run a volunteer organization knows that you have a wide range of skill abilities, and we've run enough events and know our volunteers really well, and we want to make it a community event. And so there are people that you just have, that just chit chat and make sure that everyone feels comfortable. And then there's people that really do a yeoman's job and make sure stuff is now in the system and all that. But it still comes down to a key couple of people, and it's vaccine management or medicine management, whatever. That is a highly skilled, and you don't want to screw up kind of situation. So somehow the FRCOG has got to have the ability to have people that would take this on in an emergency. I'm not saying have paid people on staff, but have the ability that people will get training, and then have the ability to manage the MIIS system and also the vaccine, or whatever medication is being handed out. That is really one step beyond most volunteers. And it's not a responsibility as much as I'm committed to making sure that our EDS is alive and active and ability to do. We have 8 different plans. We can do it. We have, 140 volunteers. Most of them are fairly good volunteers, but that is one thing that I don't feel comfortable at, that should be a volunteer position. That is really a skilled, technical kind of job that we need to have capacity for. And that was what the problem was, I think. Yes, the governor didn't say we're not going to use EDSs, but Greenfield didn't have very much experience at all. And they just, they ran their clinics. But it was the ability to handle the vaccine. And that's what we need, I think, the technical experience for.
Thank you.
So this is the kind of talk that we recommended, if you remember step 1, just so you know. It's kind of the internal FRCOG, get together and see what you guys agree to go forward. And this is the kind of the discussion we recommend you guys have at some point in the future, so you can decide where you really stand and where you want to go. I just like to remind you of one thing. You didn't form the FRCOG or any of the organization or any of your towns or cities with the idea that there was going to be a pandemic affecting everybody, that within, like Bill said, unemployment, right? People locked from school, businesses shut down. So keep that in mind. We had no idea. I'm sure you thought there might be maybe an earthquake someday, but snow, maybe a hurricane would hit part of the state, maybe giant fires, maybe, some kind of shooting incident. So, the fact that you were able to respond with an organization that was not even considering this could happen is pretty impressive. So if you can plan for something like this to happen again, then everything else that will probably happen will be a lot easier to happen, because you're just going to go to page 35, chapter 35, and you're going to go, okay, we got that. The odds that you're going to have to go the whole book again are pretty slim, but you'll be prepared for that. So as you know, you prepare for the worst, you'll have no problem with the small stuff. And you'll know right then, if you do it right, in my opinion, you'll know that. And it's funny because I talked to Caroline, and it was a pleasure with her. And if the town next to hers has a problem, well, your page 47A is going to say, hey, in Caroline's town, they can hand you with this. And FRCOG will go, we've observing, we'll help you communicate. Great. Problem solved. That's what we're recommending. Now, as far as what went on and what you think should do, that is really your business. So,
Thank you.
Sorry, Brian, we're laughing because I believe the lights went off upstairs in our office, according to Mark Maloney, throwing
Not
his
just like,
notebook.
I'm not swatting at flies or something. I'm just trying to get the motion sensors to keep me in the light.
Energy efficiency. So I would just, are there any other comments?
I would just, can you hear me?
Yeah,
I would
yes.
just like to say, I think Franklin County responded much better to the epidemic than the federal government did. And we should be bowing over and just taking all kinds of pats on the back for that. The more I hear about the EEPs and all of the stuff that happened, it blows me away on the federal level. I think Greenfield and the COG should just, like I said, take a pat on the back. You guys did a great job. The county, which isn't really a county anymore, that was what the Council of Governments was all about in the beginning. But anyway, thank you. And
thank you, Wayne.
Everybody
Well
did.
said.
Well said, for sure. And I think, so the next steps going forward are really, I remember early on, we kind of got together, I don't know if Linda had said, or like, do we have authority to do this? What we had no idea what the steps should be or who should take the role. I know early on, I think Deerfield was, through Carolyn, was one of the first towns to declare a state of emergency early on in the pandemic, because we were like, well, there's funding coming, we got to make sure that we do these steps. But after that, we would get together with our South County group and start having weekly phone calls about the issues that were going on. But as we started to get into it further, we talked more regionally here, like, and what is FRCOG's role in this? And do they have the authority? So the steps are really to find out what authority should be taken. And there's obviously a recommendation that there should be some authority given and some structure set up so that we can respond. And I'm not sure how those, if there's additional meetings that happen and we kind of talk about
Our
that.
hope is that we're going to continue working with Arden to work
Yeah.
through all of these discussions, and that
The
we
maps.
really envision that this is a 1 to 2 to 3 year discussion and process to get to change
Right.
in whatever way we need. So if they will continue working with us, that's what our hope is.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
good,
good.
good.
Well, it's great to have your experience and, in seeing, from multiple different levels on large scales, kind of how do we address this on our county level when we don't have a county structure, and trying to figure out who is supposed to be in charge and what should they be doing, and when certain towns feel they don't have capacity and when other towns feel like they have way more capacity, and that's that balance that's really tough to figure out. When I think there can still be a good overlay of authority, and then there should still be some autonomy here and there to be able to just run with things the way we need to. But it's vaccine management. That was the hardest thing, and the state did a horrible job of that. I understand why they did it, and it made sense, because if you poll a bunch of people, that's kind of what you get for an answer. But it is more granular. When you do get down to the different areas, it shouldn't be a one size fits all. And that's how we should address this, not one size fits all for our group, but there does need to be some underlying authority to say, this is what we want FRCOG to do in this position. And when this happens, when a tornado wipes out 2 towns, or 3, or even just 1, but there's all kinds of disasters that can happen. But it's a great organization, and I love to be a part of it. And I know everyone's trying to do the best they can for everybody, and we care about our neighbors, and that's why we're here.
Hey, I know we've already gone over it, so I don't want to belabor that, but I would just say, here's what I took from the interviews, all right? The way you should refer to, in my opinion, I'm just giving my opinion, the people in charge, everybody in this room, the county's in charge, all right? Everybody's in charge. What you're going to do then in a time of peace, you're going to hopefully get an organization and a response mechanism, which makes you not have to do the emotional thing later on, because the town's always in charge, right? And so if you settle it up in time and say, so you're in charge, and you as in charge, whether it be Caroline, whether it be Bill, Mike, whoever, you've all agreed that this works the best structure. And the hard part is that if you can get it, then you get everybody to say, hey, stuff hit the fan and we're going to now fall because we're all in charge. We made this up together. So, because sometimes when you say the word in charge, they go, well, he's not going to tell me what to do or she's not going. Well, FRCOG's not telling anybody what to do. You agreed the FRCOG would run it, not that they own you. And I just would caution you all those words because those were fighting words I heard occasionally. That's the only pushback we got to increase authorities for the FRCOG. Everybody agrees you need to have them. They just get a little nervous. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, great comment. Thank you. Makes sense.
Have we done it?
We good?
Thank you, Bill. Thank you,
Yes.
Scott. Thank you, Brian.
Oh,
Thank you,
one more
council
question.
members. Oh,
Carolyn, you have
got a
one
new
more?
hand?
I just want to make a comment that we did vote at MAPCO, our last MAPCO meeting, to continue having them help us or help MAPCO with our money that we had in our budget. But it hasn't been approved yet on the state level. So we're hoping to have that before our May 16th meeting. So hopefully we can continue the discussion on the MAPCO level and going forward.
Thank you.
Because we were really happy to have them, and it is a good report. It's very well done.
So the report will get passed out, emailed out to everybody and you can all dig in.
Yep.
That'd be great. Any further business? Are we ready to adjourn? Do we have anything
I'm
else?
sleepy.
I'm
Anyone
tired.
else?
I'm hungry. Motion to adjourn. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Second?
Aye.
All right, great. All those in favor? Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Brian, thank you, Scott, Bill, very much
Thanks,
appreciate it.
Mark, for